Good evening, everybody, and welcome to episode 19 of Talking TSR. I am your co-host, Chris, and to my virtual left or right, wherever we are today, is Rick. How's it going, Rick?
It's going good, my friend. Happy Father's Day.
Yes, happy Father's Day to you as well, and to all the fathers out there, and fathers, and all that good stuff. It seems like it's been a while since we've been on, but it isn't. So we got another excellent, awesome episode for you guys tonight. First of all, happy summer. Summer is officially here in addition to Father's Day, so yay. Couple other quick announcements. This weekend is DCC Day on Saturday, so hopefully folks are going to get a chance to possibly go out to a game store, their friendly local game store in person. I actually discovered a new one about 20 minutes away from my house that just opened up actually opened up in November because, hey, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Let's open up a game store. But it was very promising, and I look forward to actually maybe even they had a specific RPG room with a custom table in there and everything. So
Nice.
I don't know. Once I feel a little bit comfortable in a couple months, I might want to check them out a little bit further. And one more real quick announcement: the Dying Earth Kickstarter from Goodman Games is going to be dropping sometime very soon this week. I forget exactly what day, but hopefully all those Dying Earth fans out there, if you're interested in that, that's going to be coming soon. So what's new in your world, Rick?
Yeah, I'm just excited for the summer and a semi-return to normalcy. I am gearing up my gaming group for some in-person gaming. We're all kind of
Yes.
we're all either vaccinated or getting vaccinated, and our families. So I'm excited. I've definitely done the online thing and sampled it, and I'm glad I've sampled it. But I really miss having people around the table, kind
I
of doing
agree.
that in-person thing.
Yes.
I thrive on that. I get a lot of energy from that in-person interaction. So I'm really looking forward to that. And
I agree. Yeah.
as a side effect too, like while I was kind of cooped up during the pandemic, I've been painting figures like a fiend. So I have I have like a year and a half's worth of figures that my
Oh,
players have not seen that I will be, springing upon them. So it's
that's
all
awesome.
good.
See, there's some silver linings, a few here and there, but that's
Absolutely.
good. Awesome. So Paupernaut is in the chat. So hey, how you doing?
Hey.
Wishing us some well wishes there. That's good to see you. So tonight we have another. It seems like we have all these awesome ones. Last episode was great with the first edition DMG, but tonight we're going to talk about an awesome module. We're talking about N1 against the cult of the Reptile God. You've got it right there. This was in my top 10 favorite modules of all time when I did that list. That's something we probably need to revisit those lists. It's been a year and a half, I think, since we've done those. So we are going to discuss this in detail tonight. We're going to dive into it. We're going to talk about our what we think about the module, a couple interesting tidbits about the module. And then we're going to do a top 5 of our favorite encounters that we like with it. So Rick, I'm going to let you start with just some high level overall thoughts,
Sure.
introspective of this classic module.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind, and I think it was something we both noticed when we were kind of doing our pre-show discussion, is just how well put together this module is and organized for the time, for being a module that came out in, I believe, 1982. It's everything's there. All the pieces are there. It's well organized. For the areas with the cult involvement, there's a bold face, cult members, and that's part of the story, kind of, so the DM easily knows who's kind of good and bad, and because who's good and bad is a big factor, obviously, in this story. And that's one of the things right off the top that just really impressed me, is just how clean this module is and well organized, that you can just pick it up and it doesn't seem to have that sort of chaotic organization that you see in so many of the classic older modules, that there's so many modules I love, but when I go back and read them, I think, oh my goodness, these are not made to be, just grabbed and played. You really need to know these. And this module, I think you could kind of, just run it so much easier because of that organization. So that's something that struck me right off the bat.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Very, very tight design, very well organized, read aloud text, I believe, in every single encounter. I love the bolding of the NPC names. This was something, I don't know when. It's an interesting, that would be an interesting thing to find out when actually that started. But they got away from that eventually, and I know they brought that back for fifth edition, and I was like, oh, that was a good idea,
Yeah.
bold, bring your attention to it. But yeah, that little message, cult members here. I'm gonna throw it out there. I'm gonna poke the bear right off the bat.
Uh-oh.
And obviously, if folks who have been following our show, probably they've heard all of our talk about Village of Hamlet and Temple of Elemental Evil. I will say it. I will say that this module is better than the Village of Hamlet. Now, it's probably not held in the same esteem. It doesn't have the same historical connotation that classic module had because of all the anticipation and the story and the fact that Gygax wrote it. But as far as, it's essentially the same thing, and you can see that Douglas Niles clearly used Village of Hamlet as his template, if you will.
Yeah.
But I think the execution here was so much better. I
Yeah.
mean, and just like starting with the organization,
Hmm.
and then some of the other things that we're going to talk about, the additional material that was added to really, like you say, help the game master run it at the table. Now, that being said, there was probably a pretty good reason for it. I mean, Douglas Niles had the template already there
Hmm.
when Village of Hamlet was written. There wasn't. This was like the first one that was a village and a dungeon.
Yeah.
This time he had something to go for, and he looked at something and he said, oh, I can do this, and I can do it one step better. And so that's, so kudos though for him to doing that and pulling that off. And honestly, I think Doug Niles is got to be considered right up there as one of the better adventure
Yeah.
designers of
Definitely.
that era. So
Yeah. I agree wholeheartedly. It's interesting. They're each their own place. I think the Village of Hamlet has some great businesses, example businesses, and things like that, and places like the Druid Grove and things that stand out as very unique. But certainly Orlane, when it comes to detailing the NPCs and their thoughts about their neighbors and that kind of stuff, it really injects a lot more life into it. And I I don't think the DM has to lead people quite by the nose as much in this. I think in the Village of Hamlet, there's a little bit of a danger that if you don't have a very astute group, it could take them a little while to kind of drill down and find the evil, which I guess
mhm.
is maybe part of the Village of Hamlet is going to this area where it seems like evil's been stamped down and looking for it. But in Orlane, there's more suspicious activity. There's a lot more going on, and yet there's still red herrings and things. And I just like the way it's implemented in Orlane. I think Niles just knocks it out of the park when it comes, and it's a reusable base of operations. I think once the evil is kind of stamped out and things are returned to normalcy, a DM could absolutely take Orlane and make it into a base of operations.
Oh, definitely, yeah. And it's cut from that same cloth that Hamlet is too. It's almost the exact same number of
Yeah,
encounter areas. It's got a temple instead of like a keep. But it's just even some of the titles of some of the encounter areas
mhm,
are very reminiscent, rundown ramshackle cottage and stuff
yeah,
like that.
yeah,
Some of them, but then some are blacksmith, and some are not that, but some are also
mhm,
that kind of way that Gygax did it in Hamlet. So definitely much. I love the fact that all the NPCs have names,
mhm.
and there's great names. I wrote a few down, so I wanted these. I mean, some of these are great. Snigrot Dogroot. I mean, that's awesome. Derek Deslay, the assassin. Derek Deslay. Errol Rockton. Myron Tweed. And we can't forget Explictica Defilis, which if that
Yes.
doesn't conjure up images of Wile E. Coyote and the
Yeah.
Roadrunner, I don't know what does. So we do have a question from Neubert RPG. Let's see. I love, this is a long one, so I actually had to read this. Chris and Rick, I love how both the module and B4 have monsters that get treated as gods. Besides Explictica and Zargon, Can you think of other monsters from modules that were treated as gods? I'll let you ponder that for a minute. I think a good classic one right off the bat of my head would be Ravenloft
Mhm.
I6. How Strahd was very much kind of godlike. I mean, he kind of created the whole country and was kind of had control of the whole country, and really, you had to defeat him to escape the demi-plane of Ravenloft. So I think he's a classic one there. And do you have any others that you can come up with, Rick?
Yeah,
Because
I'm
it's a
not
great.
I'm not thinking of one right off the top of my head, though I know there must be one. But it's worth noting that the first adventure kind of I wrote for Goodman Games, I followed that concept, and that, when I wrote the Scaly God was basically about a bunch of troglodytes who
Oh,
were convinced that an injured blue dragon was their god, and I kind of went with that riff. So it's absolutely a solid,
oh yeah,
it's
yeah.
a solid plot conceit that I like, so because I used it in my first outing basically. So
Yeah,
yeah,
it's definitely a classic trope. So
yeah,
I love the detail of the NPCs.
hmm,
Like I said, the mere fact, again, we didn't get that in Hamlet. Hamlet, they only a couple of them were named, and it was
yeah,
really kind of up to your thing. And I think your point, going back to Hamlet for a second, about how um that you could really the characters could really wander around for a while before they quote unquote find the dungeon.
mhm,
I think that really put the onus on the game master to get them there.
yeah,
I think the same here in Orlane, except for the fact I think that Niles gives the game master all of the tools in
mhm,
crazy detail
yeah,
on how to get them through the investigative part of the village, and then some of the other locations, and then even down to the trek to the dungeon nearby, and
mhm,
then the actual dungeon.
yeah,
We were talking earlier on, so the module's 28 pages long.
mhm,
The actual dungeon part of it, the two levels at the end are about 6.5 pages long. So there's 22, 21 pages, 20 plus pages of additional material. That's the investigative part of the module, and all the trappings and everything. So I think it's fascinating.
yeah. And that was a surprise to me, and I think you had said that surprised you too, that the brevity of the dungeon, when I actually looked at it in my mind, even though Chris and I really love these modules and know them very well, sometimes we haven't looked at these in a couple of years or longer. And taking this module out and sort of rereading it, I guess in my mind, I had the dungeon as a bigger part of this module. Like, I
I did
thought of it
too.
as being 50% of the
Yeah.
module. And again, I know the module well. This is absolutely one of my top 10 TSR classics. And I always say I love this module. I love that module, but I really, truly love this one. And looking back on it, though, I was shocked at just how, like you said, out of 28 pages, what a small amount of space, the dungeon takes up. And it's not a small dungeon either. I guess there's just so many other encounter areas, plus I guess one of the ways in which this module is a little dated is the brevity of some of the rooms, because you do get some of
Yeah.
these kind of where this cave's got three ghouls, this cave's got four troglodytes, kind of stuff that you used to see in the older modules, where you
Yes.
get more of
Definitely.
a sprinkling of different monsters, but treated much briefer, where they would just get, three in this room, four in that room, three in this room, um, but yeah, it's interesting, and what a whole package you have here. That's one of the things I love about this too, is you get the fully detailed town, you get all this NPC detail, you get several buildings that are absolutely, and if we
Mhm.
can get the building graphic up there, like as an example, you get several buildings in Orlane that are hyper detailed. Two full inns, you get all the rooms, you get the temple of Marika before you even get to the dungeon, and then you're given good detail on travel to the dungeon and wandering monsters, and you're giving all that information. And Niles even throws in extra details about if the players are captured at the end, there's sort of that post, further adventures. He puts a little tidbit in there about further adventures, which again wasn't really standard back then, and it was just again, harkening back to what I said about the module being well organized and feeling more modern than it was. There's just all the building blocks are there for the DM to run with. I think you're given really a wonderfully full package, um, and that's one of the things I really love about the modules. It's got everything.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I originally thought it was 50% dungeon, 50%
Mhm.
village of Orleans, and to find out it really wasn't. And I remember we were on a conference call talking about it, and I was like, well, it's count how many pages it is anyway. And I'm like, wow, it's only 6+ pages, and it's like that's kind of surprising. Because I thought that same thing. I thought, it's at least it's 10, 12, 15 pages of dungeon,
Yeah.
but it wasn't. And even though that was the part that I think my group probably remembers the most, they probably don't remember the investigation as well. But just kudos to Douglas Niles for just hitting everything and just organizing it all and really making its table presence shine,
Mhm.
to really like it's one of those modules I kind of feel like you could kind of grab, and in a half hour of kind of flipping through you could do that. You couldn't do that with Village of Hamlet, without starting them right at the moat house. I think the game master would struggle a little bit too much, and the players would struggle, and I think that would kind of lead to some frustration. So um yeah, so I love it, and I just think that really I think you could learn a lot from reading this module. Like if
Mhm.
you have not gotten this module, and if you are designing things for your own group, I think something like this, just kind of seeing some of the ways that things are set up, some of the events and the timeline aspects of it, I think are a huge benefit to a neophyte game master, or even a game master that's probably looking to kind of brush up a little bit on things.
That's a really good point because a lot of these classics that we enjoy are not, I hate to say it, good examples in that you
Yeah,
can't read them and pick up all the tips or how to organize from them. But this one certainly, uh, everything's in the right order. Things are
yeah,
clearly presented for the DM. It's just, it's well organized. It's I can't say it enough that just I was so impressed going back and looking at this. I always knew I liked the plot and I liked what was going on, but I don't think it was as fresh in my mind of just how well the details were all laid out for the DM. It really, it could have been very bewildering and difficult for a DM to run this, and it wasn't. So yeah, kudos to Doug Niles. Definitely knocked it out of the park for one of his neophyte efforts. So just great stuff. So what else struck you about this module?
besides the structure of it and the how to get from point A to point B to point C and all the detail in that, the final encounter, love the
Mhm.
final encounter. We've already agreed ahead of time that we weren't going to have the final encounter be in our top 5 list, because again, I think it would both be number one most
Yeah,
likely. But
low hanging fruit.
yes, but I think that final encounter with the Naga, it just checks off so many boxes, and it does a lot of things. I think in rereading it, that that we kind of take for granted now, but I think back then was really kind of a first. I mean, first of all, the environment of that final room was amazing. I mean, it was a flooded room. There were pillars with light that you didn't know where the light was coming from. And the Naga was not just sitting out in the open. She was like in an alcove to the side, and there was a boat there. Thankfully, there was a boat there. But it was just the setup was great. You didn't see the villain. You probably at this point, well, you might have known you were going up against a Naga. There were several clues you were going up against a Naga at this point, but not really knowing that. And I'll throw this out to you. Your first level to maybe third level characters, and you're fighting a Naga.
Mhm.
What do you think about that? Like, I want to hear what your opinion is on everything besides probable TPK.
Yeah, I mean that's just it. It's absolutely potentially a very dangerous encounter. Though again, kind of giving kudos to Doug Niles, there's a lot of details in this module about
Mhm.
kind of scaling information of the type that we tend to put in our Goodman products about,
Yep.
well, maybe this magic user can do this instead of this, or, there's notes about how the NPC that, will very likely accompany the players, how much aid they can provide, how much the DM should use them and not use them.
Yes, exactly.
um, there's a note about one encounter about use of a sanctuary spell or not, or whether a bad guy should have some extra henchmen. Like Douglas puts notes in basically how to gear things up and down, and he even specifically I think in the final encounter, if I remember right, he calls out and basically says, "Hey, if this is a really low level party, you might want to do this." And I like that. Again, it's just falls right on top of the stack of what I was talking about how well detailed and organized this is. Is he takes into it? He seems very aware that it could be a potentially difficult encounter, and gives them an NPC that can really help them hurt the Naga, but seems to be very careful not to make it a De Machina kind of, we're going to take all the agency away from the characters,
Yeah.
because it's a fine line. You've got a powerful NPC that can help the characters in a big way, but you don't want to take that heroic moment away from the characters.
Yep.
And I think Niles threads that needle pretty well.
Yeah, and I think exactly. I mean, that NPC is old and feeble and just has trouble walking. So the characters, if that NPC comes along, have to take that into account. And
Mhm.
part of that. And I've used this a lot because there's been a lot of times where you want a bigger, badder final boss encounter than the characters can probably handle. So
Mhm.
how do you do that? And in the modern game, everything's on, encounter levels and CRs. It's a little bit easier to put a mathematical equation to it. Not that it's perfect,
Mhm.
but seeing some of the ways did it. I mean, I did that for FEF 5, my dragon module, Into the Dragon's Maw. There was a Quaddle who you could free and bring with it, but I made the Quaddle blind so that you had to lead the Quaddle
Mhm.
around in its human form. And even though it had pretty powerful abilities and everything, it wasn't going to be an NPC that was going to outshine the player
Yeah.
characters. And that was a way to have a CR20 encounter with only 10th level characters, or
Yeah.
and to do some things with that. And we just did that with the tournament module that we did for um the last online convention, where we had essentially a CR25 dragon again, and we had 12th level characters, and we had to get creative on how to frame that encounter and
Mhm.
make it so it wasn't an automatic TPK.
Yeah.
And I think you're seeing that, and it'd be interesting to see it. This could be the first instance of that. Back in the old classic one, it's fascinating. Reading those hints, and like you said, here's all the things that NPC can do to help them, but here's the things that you can do to pull it back and
Yeah.
and let the player
Yeah.
character shine, because ultimately the players are the ones that should be shining, not some
Yeah.
NPC.
And he does go into depth about how feeble and slow and the NPC is, which I just love. And harkening back to the Naga, I just love the whole villain concept here. I
Mhm.
love the fact that they looked at this aspect of the Naga, which is just permanent charm, and
Okay.
this whole sort of thing is just based on that one monster ability.
Yeah.
This whole cult, this whole spreading evil is all just kind of riffing off of the Naga's ability because it happens to be permanent charm. And I love that. It's like, looking at a monster and finding one little element of the monster and just really running with it and basically almost taking the whole adventure really just springs from this one ability that the Naga happens to have, that it's using in a way it should. And how many times Nagas will just be hanging out in an underground cave, and here we actually have a Naga that's kind of working it. It's basically
Yeah.
this Naga
Yeah.
is this is a very ambitious Naga.
Yes.
It's like
Yeah.
uh, and I love that. I love the enable creature that's actually using its abilities in the fullest way possible.
Yep. And then even some notes and some hints on some of the NPCs that didn't fall to its charm, what
Oh yeah,
happened to them,
yeah.
what
Oh
their
yeah,
fate was and everything. And so that was fascinating as well too. And realistic in the fact that the entire village was not cult members.
yes,
It was
yeah,
just some of them, because it takes time to get
yeah,
them all converted, or
yeah.
and it was nice how they would tell you, oh, these were some of the earliest ones over a year ago. These
Mhm.
were converted up. This one's very recent, only a couple weeks
Yeah,
ago. So it gives you that perspective of the kind of the pecking order of the
yeah.
cult and
No,
everything.
absolutely. You get this sense of how the evil spread through the village, because I think they mentioned like the people in the Golden Grain Inn were among the first, which is
Yes.
why the
Yep.
Golden Grain Inn
Is
saw some changes, made
Yep.
to it by these guys because, they were maybe, very early on. in the process. And now you get the sense when the characters stumble upon the scene that now the evil is actually threatening to spread beyond Orlane, that,
Yeah,
people, there's one or two little notes in there referencing, the evil kind of going beyond the borders of Orlane, which to me just jacks up the stakes a little bit, because now
yeah,
you really have this evil that could spread from town to town and really become a problem all because of one Naga. So I
certainly.
love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, no, it is great. Another comment from Nola Burt. Yep, definitely check out Scaly God. We recommend it. Any chance that N1 will get the ore treatment? I love this module.
Yeah.
I also love the Saltmarsh series, and then Wizards of the Coast beat me to that one. So yeah, I mean, obviously, if this would be a great one to do.
Yeah.
Lots of opportunities to expand this one.
Yep.
And this would be an amazing one to work for. And
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to really getting back to some lower level stuff after doing so
Yeah.
much high level stuff recently.
It would
So
be on my short list, I think,
it's definitely on my short list
for what
that's
it's
out
worth.
there. So thanks for the
Yeah.
comment. And Vitani Maru, thank you for answering the questions in the chat. We appreciate that, and good evening to you as well. So I love, even in this final encounter, the fact that there was a big old pile of treasure. Love that. And the fact that there was some hints about, okay, well, they're probably not going to get all the treasure, because if the NPC comes with them, um, you know, this NPC wants this, that, and that, and next thing.
Mm,
And a potion. So a great way to, here's a big pile of treasure, because it was probably a lot more treasure than a first level, second level party should get. A
yeah.
great little mechanism built right in there,
Hmm.
where you can have, yes, big pile of treasure, but you're not going to get all of it.
Yeah.
You're probably going to lose some of the choice bits and
Yeah.
pieces on that. And again, just another great example of Douglas Niles scaling things.
Yeah.
And like, if this is too much,
Yeah.
here's a way that
And
you
it's
can take
fair,
care of that.
because, the characters are maybe taking on a tougher threat than they normally would and getting aid fighting that threat. So then they're not getting all the treasure that they normally would, from
Yeah.
that higher level threat. So it all works out. It's well thought out.
Yes. And could this module could be the one that started the awful trend of player characters wanting to cast light in NPCs' eyes, because they actually mentioned this as a tactic that you could
Huh.
actually blind the Naga, and then she can't use her charm gaze if someone casts light on her eyes.
Mm.
And I'm pretty sure that was not the original intent of the first level spell back in the day.
No.
But I remember, oh my gosh, do I remember playing in so many games with so many, everybody's like, I cast light in their eyes, I cast light in their eyes. I think this is where it all got started from.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, which is amazing to think. It's like, wow, a TSR designer is the one that put that in our heads. Love it. So, all right. Well, we should probably jump into our top 5 list here, so we can give it
Yeah, let's
its
do it.
its due and everything. So we're gonna do our top 5 encounters from the module, and then do you have an honorable mention, Rick?
I don't. I'm gonna just jump right in.
Okay. I do have an honorable mention,
Oh,
so
go
I'll
for
go
it.
first then. So,
Yeah.
so my honorable mention, we've been hinting about this NPC. I'm going to say it's going to be Area 27 Aurora Lane, the Grove of Stately Elms, and this is where Ram, the wizard, lives.
Mhm.
And he is a 7th level wizard, which is high level for him. He can cast 4th level spells. And he's into what's going on with the cult, but he's an old man,
Mhm.
and he's not very mobile. He does have a weasel familiar, who can track the troglodytes by scent. I love that, by the way. I love
Whiskers.
that. Yeah, so it's like, if the
Whiskers the
wizard,
weasel.
yeah, so if the wizard doesn't come with you, Whiskers might come with you and track. And I think that's just brilliant. He has a stash of magic items that he could bring along, but he only brings them out, if he really feels he needs them. So
Yeah.
I love it. And again, there's those notes in there to not make sure he takes away the spotlight from the player
Yeah.
characters. And again, the similarities between this encounter and the Druid Grove in Hamlet are right there. I mean, it's like, you just make him, I think that Druid, Turjan, I think it was.
Persian,
In
yeah,
Yeah,
Persian.
he was seventh level, I think,
Mhm.
and so it's amazing the parallels there and everything.
Yeah,
So that's my honorable mention, is that encounter right there. So
nice.
then, why don't you jump into it on your
All
number
right,
four?
I will start with a more mundane one. And this was a harder list to put together than I thought because I think, again, some of these rooms are so brief that I think we're similar in the way that we like these hyper detailed areas and rooms, where they're really detailed out at great length. And I found a lot of these areas are very brief. But my easy number five was just the second treasure room, which is in the lower level, I think, of the dungeon. There's uh I like the fact that the treasure was salted about the dungeon instead of being one huge pile someplace. There's several
Okay.
treasure caches. So if the characters, miss one or they don't happen to, blunder into this particular cave, because certainly areas of the dungeon can be missed. There's a few areas where like the crocodile pool, you're kind of almost forced to go across them, but there's plenty of caves that can be completely bypassed. So Niles has put several little treasure catches, but this one, it's cleverly hidden where if the characters look into it, they've seen many kind of caved in areas with pools of water, and it looks like that. But in this case, the cultists kind of put the treasure around the corner and on a ledge out of sight. And there's a rowboat that's hidden behind a secret panel, and that's detailed, in great depth how to open up this panel to get this boat out where you can kind of ferry yourself around to get this catch of treasure. So I just thought that was a cool little detail. I thought it could have just easily been a little secret cave with some treasure in it, but Niles took that extra step and detailed it out. I thought in an interesting way, in a way that fit the theme of the dungeon. So by putting a boat in there on water and just to a greater extent, I love the whole dungeon being different, being a very damp, crumbling, muddy place as opposed to the usual kind of solid
Mhm.
rock or cave environment too. So that anyway, that's my number five is the second treasure room, area number 23.
Excellent. All right. My number five is Area 10 of the Temple of Marika.
Mhm,
You know me, I love rooms with statues in them,
mhm,
and this is the obligatory statue room.
mhm,
Strange in that the statues are statues of crops.
mhm.
Makes sense. I mean, it was a goddess of agriculture.
Yeah,
But yeah, nine golden statues, all very valuable. And since the temple is pretty much under control of the cult, does kind of beg your 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 thought process there to why have they not disturbed these very
mhm,
obviously valuable golden statues. And it's very clear, obviously they're cursed, and not only they're cursed, it's like a nasty curse, like it's
yeah,
cumulative, like
yeah,
depending on like which statues you move, like you can get cursed like 4 or 5 times. In the old
yeah.
bestow curse spell, like, reduces your one of your abilities down to three. Like, if you disturb like three statues, like you could have threes and three of your abilities, and
Yeah.
it could really be devastating. So yeah, that was more of a nod that I just love statue rooms, and again, giving a room where maybe you shouldn't mess around with things, and maybe the what you potentially could gain there is not going to be worth what you could there. So that's my number five,
Mhm.
Area 10, the Temple of Marika.
That one almost made my list because, yeah, I love the fact that they kind of put that in there like, well, why wouldn't the cult members steal all this gold?
Yeah,
Kind of thing. And like you said, the curse is nasty.
yeah.
So, yeah, definitely. I guess you consider that my unofficial honorary mention.
Okay.
So, my number four was the Arched Chamber, again, going to the dungeon, first level of the dungeon in this case. This was sort of an antechamber with the harpy in it. And this just gets my points for being a very kind of evil area because here you have this whole dungeon run by Naga that's charming people. And what does Niles do? He puts a harpy in there for good measure. And there's even a note about that if you're kind of temporarily charmed or whatever and taken captive by the harpy will blind you with a dagger. And there's a detail even there about how the characters can get their sight back. But the fact that he put that in there about, what the fate would be of characters that you will very, very likely chance that characters who are, charmed will be blinded. You know, the harpy will literally cut out their eyes if I'm reading it right. It's just really disturbing and evil. So I will give that my number four. And just
Right.
for tactics alone. Um,
Okay. Well, my number four, again, I haven't even gotten to the dungeon yet. So I'm still in the village of Orlane. Area 9, the small cottage with the two elven spies.
Mm,
Loved the two elven spies, Dorian and Llewellyn. One a fighter magic user, the other fighter thief.
mhm,
I love it that they recently arrived.
mhm.
They've kind of set themselves up in their own little cottage. The whole village, obviously, most of the people in the village who have not been, taken over by the cult, they know something's going on.
Yeah.
They know there's something mysterious going on. Well, these two elves show up, and they seem, they're definitely not original residents here. They're suspicious of them. They're not just automatically
Yeah.
like, oh, they're here to help us kind of thing. I love it. Great info, great background there. um and but they are allies. They are actually asked there by the mayor. There's a great little handout
Yeah.
letter that kind of explains it and everything. But the elves, they won't help the PCs right off the bat. The PCs really
No.
have to kind of prove to them that they're not part of the cult, and they're not the ones that are causing the trouble. I mean, let's face it. Bands of adventurers don't exactly have the greatest of reputations. So I thought that was fascinating, and I thought that it was also really cool. They kind of give a little bit of details on that they're active at night snooping around. And that's most likely, if the PCs are going to fall victim to the cult, it's going to be at night most likely. So they also provided that nice little backup too. They could potentially bail the PCs out
Mhm,
if need be. But I love the potential for role playing there,
mhm,
and the potential for some allies, but you had to really kind of earn it
mhm,
first.
mhm.
And I love that handout, the handout with the little letter, so
Yes.
that even if you like broke into their cottage when they weren't there or
Mhm.
something, you could still probably find out that
Yeah.
they're really the good guys. So that's my number four, the small cottage with the elven spies.
I I think that's a great choice, and it's absolutely a key encounter NPC wise, because like you said, the fact that there's a good prominent clue there for the characters first off. And I just love the way all the NPCs are handled as far as the sort of this person's looking at that person, that
Yeah.
person, because there's at least two other NPC encounters of people who are not, have not been transformed into cult members where they're looking suspiciously at these two
Hmm.
strangers.
Hmm.
One key source of information is this older NPC, this old woman who's living in a cottage, I think alone. And I kind of picture her like an old busybody looking out the window, at her
Yep.
neighbors kind of thing. And, she's got a regular laundry list of, she suspects the storekeepers and and most of her picks are people that are cult members. But on that list, almost as sort of red herring, she also suspects the elves.
Yep.
And there's at least one other family that, noticed these two strangers and is kind of a little worried for the mayor. And I love that because, here you have this character. She's such a great source of information potentially for the PCs if they speak to her about who she suspects and not, because she's, again, I picture her looking out the window and observing what's going on in the town to a little
Hmm.
greater degree than maybe the other people. And yet she's wrong about the elves. And
Yep.
I love that whole, the characters how to, that in turn could lead to the characters going to the elves, place and either breaking in or
Definitely.
talking to them, or it just drives more interaction. Again, Hamlet, I felt was a little weak in the sense that characters are kind of randomly knocking on doors and they don't even have a huge purpose to talk to a lot of these people except just to kind of trouble some farmers and say, hey, what's going on in these parts? And here there's a little more driving things. You can speak
Yeah.
to people who give you information, who point you to other people that are suspicious, and there's sort of people directing you from place to place a little bit more and saying, hey, I think, the go to this inn, this is the good inn, but that inn is a little suspicious. And I like that. It drives the players a little more. It gives them a little more threads to follow. Because as we know, running any kind of mystery in D&D is hard.
Oh yeah.
It's
Yep.
fun. I think we all try to do it as DMs at one point or another, but my golden rule is to throw in like 3 times as many clues as you think the players will need, because it's
Certainly.
in practice running a mystery, and I consider this a mystery module in a sense. In the
Hmm.
beginning,
Hmm.
it's hard to run, and as we know, mystery modules can fall flat on their face if they're not, if the character, if the players do not pick up on the breadcrumbs. So Love it. Love that area.
Okay, great.
Wholeheartedly agree.
That was my number 4.
Yeah, good number 4. All right, moving on to my number 3. That would be the large guest room, area number 6 in the Golden Grain Inn. This is the room with the assassin in it. And again, just I love the fact that you have an evil kind of character in here who was not indoctrinated into the cult, who resisted and yet is posing as a cult member, and he is actually siphoning funds from the cult.
Hmm.
So here you have somebody who's sort of evil and they're playing the cult, but then they could also be a threat to the PCs, and a dangerous threat at that. So again, it's just another NPC detail. I think it's just such a cool concept, where they talk about this sort of little game this guy is playing, and it just fits so well into his character that he would stumble upon this enterprise and see a way to, steal some treasure for himself. And they say if his cover looks like it's going to be blown, then he's going to, head out for
Yep.
greener pastures, kind of, quietly slip
And,
out. Uh,
and the potential for him to be a sellout and
oh
totally
yeah,
just like, yeah, which is great
yeah,
too, because that just gives you another opportunity to give a well source of information
yeah.
to the PCs from
There's
basically
yeah, there's
someone on
just
the
there's
inside.
so many ways it could go,
Yeah,
he
yeah.
could blab to the characters if he's threatened, or he could expose the character, if the characters might look like they're gonna blow his cover of not being a cult member, he could just set off the alarm for the other cult members and hope the characters are killed before they can expose him. There's so many interesting ways. It drives a lot of interesting encounters, I think. So that's my number 3, The
Excellent.
Assassin and the Golden Grain.
Okay. My number 3, I still have not got to the dungeon yet. I'm getting closer though. I'm getting closer. My number 3, it's actually not a fixed encounter area. It is the ambush in the Golden Grain Inn,
Mm, okay.
which gets a page plus treatment at the end of the Orlane chapter. And this is a great one page of the module. I mean, it gives you the breakdown of the timeline of what happens with what the cult's doing while the PCs are investigating it, and if they stay at the Golden Grain Inn, it gives you detailed notes on how the ambush, how they'll set up, how they'll try and
Mm,
sneak into the room. Based on the innkeeper will try and separate the PCs up. I could see trying separating them up. Put the weak PCs in one room and the strong PCs in another, and then they give you the rundown of
mm.
the cleric that comes from the temple, the assassin, and then a couple troglodytes and the lackeys. Great. If actually we can pull up the picture from the Trog attack on there, which is great.
Which I
It's a
love.
great picture. I believe that's Holloway, actually, if
Yeah,
I'm not
that looks like
mistaken.
pure
Yeah.
Holloway.
But I love the detailed tactics. They cast the
Mhm,
cleric casts silence on a rock, and then they toss it in the room,
mhm,
and then then they're but the cleric stays outside of the room, so the cleric could still cast spells if need be. Love it, and then all the ramifications. If the characters get captured, what happens? There's details on that.
yeah,
They're thrown in the cellar. Then they're marched to the lair, and then if they're marched to the lair, they're brought right to the Naga. And if the Naga charms them, then there's a little table of like where they're assigned.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
so it's like, so even if the party gets split up, or if
yeah,
it's a great way to get the party to the final dungeon
yeah,
by having one or two PCs kidnapped and sent there.
yeah,
And then it'll tell you exactly what's going to happen to them. So
yeah,
really, and
yeah,
it's all right there, and I love it. It's just like reading that part was just so much fun. It just gives you all of
yeah.
that like Doug Niles sat down and thought all
He
these
thought
things
it
out.
out. Yeah,
Yes, like
absolutely.
logically, what would happen if this
Yeah,
happens and then this
yeah,
happens, and then if it's the PCs aren't the ones that are the focus of the kidnap, then he's got a list of all the NPCs that are on the list of here's the next ones to be kidnapped. So theoretically, some of them could be bait, or the PCs could stake out one of those
mhm,
NPCs or something, and they could get to the lair that way. So
mhm,
absolutely fascinating. I love it. The detail is amazing.
yeah,
And I just it just so much goodness in there, and
yeah,
so much of a nice template to show a budding game master how to do it. Like,
yeah,
how would you design a module like this, a mystery module like this, where you have to get the characters to the location. We already have like 3 or 4 different ways we can get there. You can get
yeah,
captured. The wizard could show you there. Whiskers could
mhm,
follow the troglodytes there. You could follow just amazing
Yeah.
detail. And that's like you said, you need that. You if you just had one route to get to the dungeon
Yeah.
and one clue, if they never find that one clue,
Yeah.
then your adventure's kind of over. But if you have all these, secondary and tertiary routes to go,
Mhm.
most likely one of them's going to work. So
Yeah. And like you said, like that overall detail, which is so wonderful, it plugs into again that kind of existing history of Orlane's takeover. So you get the sense of what happened in the past, who got took over in the past, who's, cult members now, who the next targets are. There's very much this feel of a progressing event, as opposed to just the monsters standing still until the PCs stumble upon the scene. This, you really feel this place live and breathe, with what's going on, with
yes.
the spread of this evil is very much a living thing, which I love. And like you said, the fact that he would go to the detail, be like, well, there's this much, if you get this role, there are guards in room, cave 6 or whatever, I think
Yep.
is just awesome. Yeah, that's a good, I didn't think of that as an area. I think I would have picked that, because there's a bunch of places with different tactics that I almost picked, where people would poison your drink or do this, or that.
Yes.
And I
I thought about that
came
one too.
very close to picking, but I just didn't know which one.
Yeah.
So turning to my number 2, which again, I think is going to be mundane in comparison to that, I'm afraid. Um, I went back into the dungeon, lower level, and just went with the mud trap in room area 30. I love traps that can potentially bury people or suffocate the people. It's a
Hmm.
kind of weakness of mine. And here you had a trap where you've been led through this whole dungeon that is very clear the dungeon is crumbling and muddy and kind of environmentally dangerous, if not unsound. And here then you have a specific area where there's a chest that kind of baits the characters, and after running into one or two treasure niche areas, the characters can fully be
Yep. Hook, line, and
understood if they
sinker.
think this is, hey, it's another little goodie room. And then if they open this chest lid, literally the whole ceiling is rigged to kind of all these rafters or whatever to kind of supports to give way, and just all this mud and timbers and stuff comes down. And it rolled at the table, it can be a really fun, dangerous area to play. When I haven't run this module as much as I'd like, but when I have run it, that area really brought a lot of tension and a lot of potential danger to the PCs in a fun way. So I remember it from that. So that's my number 2. Just fond memories of the table of running that particular trap.
All right. Excellent. I'll have to admit that one almost made my honorable mention. I seriously considered that encounter. I did like that encounter, and I liked the thought about it. And I guess the only thing I didn't like about suffocating traps is I don't like them for really low level
Mhm.
characters, because I feel it's something that's better for mid level to high level characters, because it can potentially take higher level characters out quickly,
Yeah.
where trying to work down 100 hit points of a fighter is harder, but start suffocating them, and you might have a better chance there. So I'm not a huge fan of that with the low level characters. There's already a lot of ways that they can die. You
Yeah.
fall off of a horse. I had a house cat kill a character once. So but yeah, so yeah, that's my only slight thing there, but I
Mhm.
definitely did like that one. So all right, so my number 1 and number 2s are heavily influenced by times I've actually run this
Mhm.
adventure. So they're probably not on your list or anything. They're really out there, but I do finally get to the dungeon.
Mm.
Finally, lower level, area 29, right next to the trap room that you just talked about. And this is the pump room. And I know this
Mm.
is like, this is kind of an interesting one. So it's the lowest chamber in the dungeon.
Mhm.
And all the water collects there, that seeps in there and everything. And there is 5 zombies that are stationed there, and they have a pulley bucket system that brings the water up. They load the water into the buckets, and it brings the water up to the surface and dumps it into the marsh. And then the buckets come back down. And the Niles even goes to say that there's a little trick piece of wood
Yeah.
set up like in
Yeah.
a tree or something that tips the bucket once it
Yeah.
gets up to the surface before it comes back down. I love that little detail. But why do I really love this is a couple things. The zombies ignore you when you get there. Like, they will not attack you. They're
Yeah. They're
busy
doing
doing
their
their work.
thing.
Yeah, if you're stupid, and spoiler alert, my players were. And if you attack the zombies, well, then they'll stop and then they'll attack you. Well, they did that. They attacked them and killed them, and then the police system didn't work. And then, water just kept accumulating in the dungeon. And then I actually had the dungeon slowly starting to flood the lower level because, the water wasn't
Mm.
being relieved. Now, it wasn't like they had to get out of there in one turn or something like that, but it was a note. They figured it out after a while, like, oh baby, we shouldn't have messed with that room, when they started trudging through ankle deep water, and then it was, by the end of the module it was like knee deep water, and they were actually getting really concerned about things. So that was, again, it's a simple room and everything.
Mhm.
But I just remember it for our exploits when I was running this,
Yeah.
and it was just a fascinating room. So that was
Cool.
my number 2 dungeon level to Area 29, the pump room.
Nice. My number one is actually, shocker, is outside of the dungeon now for me, and would be the antechamber in the Temple Marika. That's would be room 16. And this is kind of where I think the characters first would run into Abramo, the cleric. I like the way all the tactics of the cleric are detailed out, how he will encounter the characters, what he'll do, similar to the encounter you described. There's detail about him casting silence on a coin and tossing it, at the
Mhm.
characters, and then specifically trying to kind of force and keep the characters into that constrained area where that has been. And again, maybe akin to the light spell, I've certainly run into a lot of cases of characters casting silence on a rock or on something and, chucking it. And I can't help but wonder if this is one of the first times in print that tactic was ever expressed. Because it's the first I recall reading about it in an early module. And it's just a really devilish way for this guy to, approach the characters. Because here you have a cleric who's sort of running at the characters, made, largely solo. So anyway, I like the antechamber room. There's a couple rooms in the temple I could have picked, but I picked this one because I like the way all the tactics for the cleric are detailed out. And he can really be a kind of key bad guy before the Naga, before the characters get to the ultimate bad. You can absolutely have the cleric be like another major, figure they have to take down. So I enjoyed this room a lot. Again, like you said, good room with a lot of good memories at the table.
Yeah, excellent. So, oh, that's good. All right, my number 1, I'm embarrassed to say, is also outside of the dungeon. So as it turns out, my top 5 and even my honorable mention, I only had 1 actually in the dungeon, which is kind
Interesting.
of
Yeah.
funny. Yeah, which I was like, wow, I guess I didn't realize that when I was putting it together. There was definitely a couple of other ones in there. So,
Mhm.
and it also looks like we're not going to actually overlap,
Oh, we're
which
not
is
overlapping this.
crazy.
Wow. Yeah.
We came close a couple times because we
Yeah.
came close on this one. Mine was actually Area 18 of the Temple of Marika, the Secret Altar Room. Now I know
Mhm.
this is another really strange one. Again, this was heavily, heavily influenced by how things kind of played out in our campaign the one time when I ran this module and everything. But this is the one. First of all, there's the statue with the Naga. And I believe it's the first time you get a glimpse of what the Naga might be. I'm not sure. It depends on how you go through the rooms and everything, but
Mm.
presented in the module, I believe is the first opportunity of where you actually get a picture of maybe that's what we're up against and everything.
Mm.
So I like that. But secondly, there was the cage with the prisoner in it.
Yeah.
And the young female villager, Cirili Finla. I will never
Mhm.
forget the name, because fascinating backstory. So her whole family was kidnapped, brought to the Naga. Her whole family succumbed to the charm, but she did not. And they
Yeah.
mentioned that she's just very strong personality and everything. And I love that.
Mhm.
And actually, she couldn't be charmed.
Yeah.
She resisted the charm. And then the cleric Abramo, like you mentioned, brought her back to the temple and then beat her and mistreated her for months and
Yeah.
kept her in this cell and tortured her essentially. Yet her resolve is
Yeah.
still strong. And even we see the picture showing up there. She actually, if she gets the chance, she tries
Oh,
to
yeah.
all of her AC 10 and 2 hit points. She'll try to take out the high priest,
Yeah.
any way that she can, which is great. And in our home campaign, um, we obviously rescued her and she joined the party. Now, that was the one thing in the module. They made it very clear that she wants no
Yeah.
part of the
Not
business
going
of
to the
going back
dungeon.
to the lair or
Yeah.
anything. I changed that because that was actually the way we got our characters to the lair because they kind of
Mm,
missed everything else.
mhm,
So again, it was one of those kind of like, well, I need to get them to the lair, and I felt that when we were running the game that they just spent a little bit too much time and they were getting a little frustrated. So I switched it up and I had her lead them to the lair.
mm,
And then I had her, she was an NPC, and she stayed in the back, they gave her a dagger or whatever,
mhm,
and she did her thing. And then by the end of it, like we gave her like one level of a thief, and she became
mhm.
like a regular PC, and it was like this evolution of she really shined, and it was great. And it was probably because I ended up playing her as an NPC.
Mhm.
So that's probably why I liked the encounter more. I don't know if my players actually liked it as much and everything. But to me, it was a kind of a spur of the moment, like, okay, they're having trouble getting to the dungeon. Okay, let me just switch things around, and I'll have this be the lead into the dungeon.
Mhm.
And again, a little bit of a hindrance there, because she was just a commoner and everything,
Mhm.
and but then became an NPC and then stuck around with us for quite some time after that. So I think that's the part of why we like role-playing games, when something like that is not
Oh, yeah.
explicitly written in a module and it just evolves into that.
Mm, yeah.
Is just great. I think we had a similar thing with the NPC Cobort in Village of Hamlet, where we got him actually up to 10th level. I think he was second level when he was an NPC, and he actually joined our party because we never had like 5 or 6 players. We always had like 2 or 3 players, so we
Mhm.
were always needing NPC help. So so we were always on the lookout for, can this person help us? So that is my number one. Out, I know it's kind of out there and everything, but that's the when I think of this module, I
Mhm.
always gravitate toward that encounter.
Yeah.
So
I think of that image, it's funny. I'm almost gonna consider that an overlap because I danced for my
yeah,
number 1 between the room with the
yes,
Brahmo and this room. Because I too, I really like this room, and I think it was like one of those things where if it was treated a little different, I wouldn't have liked it. They could have
yeah,
very easily fallen into that sort of damsel in distress
yep,
trope. But instead, Niles makes a point of saying how she looks listless, but once you, and I think he uses that word listless, but then once you
yeah.
kind of get her out or, aid her,
She's fiery.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. You
yeah,
realize like here's this young little thing, and they make a point of saying she's really like a teenage girl
yep,
that she somehow defied the Naga. She hungers her
yeah,
revenge against, like you said, against the cleric. She's like really like kind of like a little firebrand and not weak at all. Like she's endured the
yeah,
Naga, she's endured the, torture or whatever the cleric has put her through, beating her, or whatever and somehow she's like a survivor. And I really like that. I think,
yeah,
again, if they had just said, well, there's, a comely woman in the cage, it would have been a disaster. But the fact that, he put this kind of strong, NPC in there, I love that.
yeah.
And
And
like
I
you
agree
too,
with
I
you.
love if an NPC can evolve like that. I think
Yeah,
that's the greatest, when
yeah.
I've had moments where that's happened in campaigns. That's always so much fun.
Yeah, I thought about putting the antechamber down as my pick because there was definitely a lot more going on in that room, and like you said, with the tactics and actually the high
They're all
priest. So
connected. It's
yeah, they were connected. It was, and I thought about it. I was like, I could do both of them, but then I'm like, no, I'm just gonna
oh
stick with
yeah,
this one and all that. So, but that
yeah.
was great. So that's our top 5 list.
There you go, folks.
Any final parting shots on the module in general?
Um, no, I think we've covered it, except the fact that I just, again, I love the NPCs. I love the way it lays everything out. And even you get a little kind of hex map treatment of the Greyhawk map, is blown up for you. You're shown
Hmm.
that. A little extra detail there about that area, which anytime a module would give me a little more, breathe a little life into an area of the Darlene Greyhawk map, I always like that.
Yeah,
Whenever a map would specifically say this hex on the Greyhawk map is where this is happening, and this one does. It shows you this is where Orlane is, this is where the Naga is. I love that. So
yeah.
props for that too, because I played in Greyhawk. That was one of my campaign settings for quite a while. So I always enjoyed that. So yeah, great module, just good module.
Yeah, yeah. I love the ending. They had that obligatory little further adventures section at the end. I
Mhm.
thought was great. Couple paragraphs on pre-generated characters, which is always good.
Hmm.
Enjoyed that, and really enjoyed the very tight credits of this. It was pretty much
Mm,
Douglas Niles and an editor, and I'm sure there was cartography and artists. They actually didn't list the artists, um, but uh, but I love it. It was, it didn't take 20 people to put this together. It was literally a handful of people, and I love that part of it. And
hmm.
definitely this module is one of my favorites of really of all time. I mean,
Yeah,
it's right up there, and I think it flies under the radar. I think for most people's
yeah,
top lists.
yeah,
I think when we did the top 10 list show, and there was four of us, I think, or three of us doing the thing. Nobody had this one on their list. They all went to the obvious ones and everything, and I
absolutely.
was like,
Yeah,
oh no,
no,
this one's right
it's
there.
always been, I think, in my top five. I would say honestly, if it
Yeah.
was a hard choice, but it would be. And props to the Holloway art too, because I think
Oh yeah.
his art is so evocative, and some of the images are perfect. Like again, the
Yeah.
one we just described, that image we just flashed up there of the
Yeah.
girl in the cage, it absolutely evokes what's happening.
Yeah.
And he manages to work a lot of humor in some of his illustrations
He
without
does.
them getting silly, and it just adds a little fun to it. So
Yeah.
I think the module benefited from a lot of the Holloway art that was included.
Yeah, he's
Um,
great at showing action,
yeah,
showing
yeah,
some, not, and
yeah.
he did some nice, passive pieces as well. But
Mhm.
his I think he really shined in showing a scene playing out.
Yeah, yeah.
Definitely without a doubt. So excellent. All right. Tell us about our next show.
Yeah, because I think it's a wrap. Our next show is coming to you folks on July 11th at 8 p.m. at a regular time. And we are going to take a look at another classic, L1, The Secret of Bone Hill. We're going to go into that module and what we like about it and don't like about it. So I'm kind of looking forward to that. Another old classic that I think flies under the radar.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree. All right, we're gonna end the show like we always do with our pearls of wisdom. It looks like I'm gonna go first, so hopefully I don't take your pearl of wisdom from you. So my pearl of wisdom for this one, it's all about NPCs. It's all about
Mm,
NPCs and making sure that they don't steal the spotlight from the characters. Because again, it's a hard balancing act sometimes. Sometimes you do need them to pull the PC's bacon out of the fire. It does happen, but having NPCs that are evocative and against the tropes like we just talked about, and NPCs that have a chance to grow, and then they might only be a stat line and one or two lines of description and personality, but then something like that can become a reoccurring character for 5 or 6 years for a campaign.
yeah,
That's what it's all about.
yeah,
So give your NPCs some love. And I know it's a hard job for the game master. He's got to do the whole world and all the NPCs, but I think that sometimes the most minor of characters can end up being some big players in your campaign. So
yeah. Great Pearl. Like I said earlier, I agree with that wholeheartedly. One of the best long running villains I had in my longest running campaign was a cleric that was supposed to be a one room cleric. I sort of
mhm.
run into him and kill him and move on. And just a cleric that ended up being devious and managed to escape from the characters. And the characters didn't like the fact that this cleric escaped. And as the clerics went up and as the characters went up in level, I had the cleric off doing his own thing, and he went up in level, and he tracked them down and trying to get revenge, and it became a cat and mouse game between this, and my players would literally refer to him to this day. They refer to him as the evil cleric. If I would say what's the most memorable villain, they don't even remember his name. They just would say the evil cleric,
Nice.
because he became like a long running villain. That was like, I think they encountered him at second level, and it was not a companion NPC. In this case, it was an enemy, but it was just as much fun. It was one of those things. So
Excellent.
wholeheartedly agree. So my pearl of wisdom, it dovetails with yours a little bit, but we don't overlap. Um, I like the fact that, riffing on the fact that the Naga is a harder than usual enemy for probably the characters that are going to go into this module. I think there's a nice kind of prompt for some DMs out there to get out of the space of that CR bucket,
Hmm.
I think you can have higher level characters maybe fight lower level opponents, you know, like you could have 5th level characters take on a bunch of kobolds that are in greater numbers, that are well organized, you know, etc.
Hmm.
There was a very famous dungeon, I think,
Yeah.
in
Dragon Mountain.
that incorporate, I can't think of the name of it, that
Yeah.
incorporated the,
Dragon Mountain. So,
yeah.
yep.
And you know, by the same token, you can certainly have low level characters fight something a little above their pay grade if they're given aid. And again, and this is where I think it dovetails to what you said, that aid coming from NPCs or wherever it's coming from certainly has to be handled carefully, and it can be a
Yep.
challenge for DM. You know, you can blow it if you don't run it properly. You don't want to take the heroic spotlight away from your characters or your players. But that said, I think that flexibility is fun, having the characters be surprised at a lower level by
Hmm.
running into something. I've
Yeah.
run campaigns where I had a very memorable moment where I had some beholders show up when characters were like 4th or 5th level, and the players were like, oh my God, you know, and I didn't just have them show up and blast the characters. They just showed up to speak and say some things, but the characters realized that their opponents were bigger, and it just, you know, I like the idea of flexibility there. So that's, to me, something that can be taken from this module is don't constrain yourself to CRs. You know, think a little above the pay grade, a little below the pay grade of the PCs, and make the changes to make it happen.
Yep. Great. Excellent. All right. Yes, so everybody, make sure you, thanks everybody for participating in the chat
Yeah,
tonight. Make sure you guys give us a like when we get this posted up on YouTube, and come check us out. And leave comments. We read the comments and everything,
absolutely.
and you know, we like to engage with people. If people have some topics that they want to see
Mhm.
on an upcoming show, let us know, and we'd be happy to get those stories. We have all sorts of cool ideas, but we'd love to have ideas from you guys too.
Never
So
have too many good ideas, right? So
yes, I know. So all right, Rick, well, you have a good couple weeks, and
you,
we'll be in touch. And thanks everybody again, and we'll be seeing you guys.
thanks everyone.
All
Bye.
right.